and namaskar and welcome to the second episode of Africa Talks, our weekly show where we try to get more information about what is happening inside Africa. The entire globe has been battling with the COVID crisis, and the pandemic has altered our lifestyle in several ways. While on one hand, most of us are confined to our homes. On the other hand, we are digitally more connected now with the outside world. Be it the school and college classes, be it our office work, be it connecting with friends or socializing, everything is happening digitally now. So while on one hand, physically we are not able to meet our friends and family members and go out and work. On the other hand, I think we are more connected now 24/7. Today, we are going to discuss a very important issue, that in the post-COVID-19 phase, how digitalization of economy, as it's going to play a very important role, how Africa is ready to embrace that challenge. And today with me, we have three panelists from different parts of the world who will be sharing their expert views today about the issue. I would like to welcome Mr. Charlie Marshall Nagonu from Cameroon. Mr. Charlie has been working passionately in the field of data rights, in the field of data security. He is also the founding president of Afro Leadership, a CSO promoting human rights. Mr. Charlie, welcome to the discussion.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me here.
Today is Mr. Asit Dubey. Mr. Dubey has joined us from Nairobi, and he is Executive Vice President of Digital Data Divide firm, a multinational company, and he has been working in Africa for several years, and he has great insights about the industry, and he'll be sharing a lot of information with us today about Africa, and I think he'll also sharing some insights about how India has developed digitally in the last 2 decades. Our third guest today is Mr. Izzy Namdi, who is also co-founder of Exilient Africa, and he is a Pan-African, and he'll be sharing his views on this topic today. So let's go ahead with the program. Digitalization of Africa has brought in several changes in terms of economy, polity, in terms of availability of health services, in terms of accessibility to educational services. A lot of remarkable changes have taken place in Africa in the last 10-15 years. Mr. Charlie, can you give an overview and share with us some insights about this digital journey of Africa and how it has transformed Africa in a positive way in the last 10-15 years?
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me here, and also welcome to all the participants to this very important session and on a very important issue. What I would say is, as first off, is that we've got in the digital technologies and a very wonderful opportunity as Africa, as a continent, you know, to leapfrog development. And given that we've missed various targets with traditional technology, today we see clearly that digital technologies can give us, you know, to cope with new kind of strategies that if our governments in Africa could tap in, we will certainly catch up some of the, you know, some of the opportunities that we've not been benefiting from since for let's say for 5-6 decades now. since independence time. And what I would say is that when digital technology started in our countries, as a technology information specialist myself, I think 30, 40 years ago, some of our countries was taking digital technology as, you know, as something for the elites. In my country, especially, it was even very difficult to even to afford a phone, even a least line phone. It was very difficult because we were adopting technology in the mindset that we got from the colonial time. But today, I think given the youth, the strength that African population being made of youth is showing today by adopting the technology. We see clearly that our government are being forced to digitalize most of our countries, and this is the result of a mix of factors. One being the fact that our continent is very young. When you look at the distribution of our demography, you see clearly that in some of our countries, like in Cameroon, you have 54% of youth in the country that are under 35 years old. And so this is the trend in most of our countries today. That has brought our government to see clearly that they can't just rely on the kind of policies that they have been used to exert, because their policy is not actually a policy for development, but a policy to prevent citizens from asking more. That's what I've learned in my country here in Cameroon as a civic activist. And so our digital journey has been hindered, very much hindered by the kind of traditional policies that we've got. And one of the truth of this is, if you look at the cost of internet today in our countries, you will see clearly that there are so many constraints, surprising constraints, that prevent people to enjoy digital technologies that we have. And this stems from the kind of policies that we are building. And so today we are facing a kind of crossroads. We are living in a time where our governments, as I see it from a digital right point of view, we see clearly that our government are very reluctant to go decidedly for digital technology. And I see it in my country here. We have been fighting in universities with the Ministry of Higher Education in our countries to make sure that universities can go digital for almost 10 years now. And I can tell you that until the COVID-19 crisis started, we didn't have online education in our universities, in our main universities. That shows you clearly that in some parts of Africa, digitalization is still a kind of buzzwords. And this is true. And this is not true for so many other countries. And especially when you look at countries in English-speaking Africa. And certainly our colleague from Aziz Dube will certainly talk more about English-speaking countries, that he knows more than me. But when I look at French-speaking countries, especially sub-Saharan French-speaking countries, you will see clearly that most of those countries that have been colonized by France, you will see clearly that our digitalization process is very much hindered by several constraints. One of them is that most of our countries, they don't see digital technologies or maybe digitalization of economy as a very serious opportunity. Yes, in political discourses, in political speeches, they will tell you that, but you don't see a kind of implementation of policy that turn the people, citizens, towards digitalization.
Okay.
The first thing that we will have shown, if they are serious about what they say when they talk of digitalization of economy, would have been certainly to lower the cost of internet, for example.
So there is
and that's
lack
not
of
true.
so there is lack of political commitment. That's what you are
Exactly.
saying for digital
Exactly.
transformation. Okay, great.
Exactly.
So that's a great point coming from there. I would like to go to Mr. Asit Dubey now, who has worked in this industry for several years, and he knows how the industry functions. Mr. Dubey, how has been your experience of working in Africa, and what kind of changes you have seen in the industry, maybe in the last 1 decade, in Africa, when this wave of digitalization has really picked up fast there?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Linda, for having me on this meeting. I think we are discussing an important topic of how, and this is the right time probably to discuss this, given the fact that this pandemic is happening right now, and this has forced people to actually embrace the change that they were, probably looking at to embrace later on. It would have taken more time, as what I see, but this is actually forcing people to, embrace the changes that they would have done maybe 5 years hence. And once the pandemic is over, I think that the kind of catching up that Africa had to do with the rest of the world, Europe and Asia and North America. So that catching up would be faster. That is one, and the gap by the end of this crisis would be lessened. That is one thing that I see. The journey has been, there were multiple factors, I think. So one was it had a late start. Africa generally had a late start. It started off when the world started at around 2000, getting into the cyberspace, getting internet connections all over the place, and computerizing everything, digitalizing everything. So compared to that, Africa was a little lagging behind in most of the cases, and they started at around 2005 or something, I would say, and that actually put them on the back foot for a long time. So, but there are countries like Mr. Charlie mentioned, the English-speaking countries, those countries who had the British colonization, they were able to adapt quickly, primarily because I think language was not a barrier. So you have everyone being very conversant with English, and they were able to embrace this change. Where compared to the francophone countries and the Portuguese, the Portuguese, these countries were able to do much better than those countries. Having said that, I also want to say that because they had a lag, so they had to do a lot of catching up. Now there were a couple of restricting factors which were there. So one is primarily the education system, mostly of Africa, has not been very great. They were always dependent on people from outside to come and teach them. They always they did not have good course material, or people who could afford to go outside, they would go outside and start their education there, complete their education there. And the result of that is you don't have, and result, cause and action, both are linked together. One is you don't see very many companies, for instance, the automobile companies. You don't have many companies here. You just have assembly plants. You don't have any manufacturing. So most of Africa is heavily dependent on imports from Japanese, Japan, or from European to get their vehicles here. Likewise, okay, those things are changing now, but also this is also because of the fact that there were not proper institutions here in place. So medical facilities were poor. The engineering faculty was not very strong. There was no course material available. So these guys had to really, slog it out to come to a level, which means that the education level was very, very low, and employability was not very, very good. So people who were able to move out did better, and people who stayed here had to stick to their old ways, like farming and those things. They had to basically stick to farming and mining basically in certain places. So having said that, again, the affordability of the IT world is not very great here because the market size is not very big. If you compare that with a place like, say, let's say India, the market size is huge, and because our education system was good and we had good universities, a lot of people could study there and then go out and get jobs, or maybe they could do a lot of startups. Our IT, the boom that happened in the 2000s and early and late 90s, that was really what actually drove India forward. But if you compare that with here, that facility was not available. So having said that, now what they are doing is there is a change happening right now. So a lot of universities have been forced to go online. They are doing online courses. They are doing, and a lot of people have realized the value of going digital, and the students now are more tech savvy. At least I see that in countries like Nigeria, Kenya, Rwanda, all these places. They have the flair to they want to change. They want to, like Mr. Charlie again said, the youth is actually driving it. So they are forcing the governments to basically make policies. So you have governments making policies like DG school in Kenya, where the students are given, tabs, and the teachers are given laptops, and there's a force that is basically driving this thing. So eventually, over a period of time, I see that okay, by 2024 or something, even at university level, you would have all colleges mostly digitized. So this is government schools are also getting, the kind of thing that we had in India. So laptops were given in India. So we have tabs given here. Courses are getting online. They are not very, very, on the higher end of technology, but something is being done. The COVID has actually forced them to go digital. It has forced them to do things using Zoom calls, for instance, or Skype calls. They're doing that. They are sending, instead of having learning management system, they don't have that right now, but they are sending PDF files. So that is happening. They are sending it. They are sending documents, digital stuff, in any format to the students, and then they are accessing and have certification centers where these things are happening. So a lot of courses are also the young generation is realizing that okay, if I go on the internet, I can get access to professional courses. So that is also a change that I have noticed. So the younger generation doesn't feel left out because they have access to world-class course material, they have access to world-class teachers, and they are getting that online. They are taking the courses, certifications, everything online, and that thing is happening.
Great. Mr. Eziogo, you know, during our discussion today, you are one of the representatives of youth. How do you see Africa, in terms of its digital access and affordability? How do you see Africa doing on that front?
Well, I think the digital journey of Africa so far has not been unsuccessful. There's been a lot of tremendous improvement, as many of the panelists have mentioned already, from Mr. Charlie to Mr. Dube. We have just one issue, which is a leadership that is analog based in a digital age. So you cannot compare, you would not expect a lot of things to change overnight, except there is a digital leadership. And once there is a digital leadership, then we can say that we are truly in a digital age. And one good thing, despite the challenges that the coronavirus pandemic has created, is that people are now looking at that option as the only option, because everything is now digital. Even despite the fact that there's going to be cure for the virus and all, or the treatment for it, there's going to be a post-pandemic mindset, whereby people would not really feel safe immediately associating with each other. They still have to depend on digital means, virtual means of connecting with each other. So accessibility has also been an issue because of the lack of a strong political will to pull the African continent towards digitalization. And despite the role of race as a historical driver of economic disparities, traditional socioeconomic prejudices in Africa that see gender imbalance in terms of gender neutrality has also been a factor. You know, we have a lot of male gender population having access to internet as compared to the female gender. Acceptance of digital systems has also been another issue, whereby the fact that the masses are not highly educated on this system actually creates an issue with them accepting it, because sometimes when you tell people to use internet in terms of as payment gateways or making payment, you see they don't really understand the fact that it's safe. You know, they don't trust that system. They want it to happen directly. So there's a lot of issues that boils around acceptance and education. Then the dependency, as was mentioned by Mr. Dube, also is another challenge. Things that are created and invented in Africa is not really appreciated by Africans, because when it's from outside, we believe that to be more sophisticated. And startups is another issue which I think also have been a failure from the part of the government and policymakers. An example is a startup that was there in Lagos, Jumia. It's an online portal where you purchase things online, but now they are having a lot of issues. You know, so, and the same way this COVID-19 offers us a lot of opportunities for startups to sprang up, and most of these startups that are coming up are digitally focused. You know, so if we don't have to redress the issue of analog leadership in Africa, I don't think we'll be able to move swiftly to a digital age.
Wonderful. I think every journey has its ups and downs, and I think it's quite possible that COVID-19 challenge might be an opportunity for Africa to really push its digital journey on a fast track. But that brings me to another issue, that one of the reports says that approximately an investment of $100 billion is required to achieve universal access to broadband connectivity in Africa by 2030. And given the situation today, from where do you think this kind of investment can come? And do you think only it will come in the form of an investment by private groups, telecom companies, or do you think institutions like World Bank and African Development Bank can also play a role? And thirdly, do you think funders like BMGF, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and other international bodies which have been regularly funding Africa for various projects, do you think they can also play an important role in improving digital access, particularly in rural parts of Africa? It's open to all of you. Maybe we can start with Mr. Charlie first.
Yes, thank you. I would say that my colleagues has just highlighted several kind of constraints, the kind of analog nature of our leaders, and Mr. Dube has talked of this situation where Africans, they don't trust things that comes from Africa. And this is also true for investment. When you look at the type of or the amount of investment that we have in our continent, we will say that most investment comes from abroad. Those are direct foreign money, and there is something that we need to crush down in Africa, that there is no money, there is no free money. And if we don't change our mindset, from this kind of help, add mindset, we won't develop. Because when you know that somebody is not giving you, something for free, and that the narrative is not a narrative, keeping you in a kind of funding slavery, you will certainly prepare yourself, to cope with the kind of relationship that you build with, with the lender, or with the lender of that money. That's the first thing I would say. And that if we keep talking of investment in Africa, something that comes from funders that will come ahead, that won't work. We need to make sure that our leaders, that they are ready to change their paradigm. And the COVID-19 has shown that clearly we still keep that old paradigm. And if we keep it, clearly that most funding that has been spent in Africa for these 5-6 decades has not brought the kind of development that was expected. And if we want to, it's clear that we can't digitalize Africa with our own means, because it's clear that Africa has not yet been able to turn its natural resources, its natural wealth in clear money, as we could say trivially. So it's obvious that we need some kind of financing scheme. But if we keep working in this kind of gray state, where you cannot know what happened to money that is borrowed, it will land on the same ground, that most funding will be sent to Africa, and then we won't optimize that money, to bring development, and then tomorrow, being unable to give back money, we will see even those investments done in Africa being captured by lenders. And that's happening actually now in some countries in Africa, Zambia and so on. And we see airports and ports being retaken by those who finance those infrastructures. So my view will be that we need to focus. If we talk of investment, we need absolutely to add to those investments that are needed. It's clear that we need investment. We need money. We need foreign money. That's clear. But we need to make sure that as Africans in our continent, that we take all those measures for transparency and accountability that can give us to make sure that we are using money for very strategic investment, and that we are not using that money in kind of spending that don't clearly give us, to exploit the opportunity that are presenting themselves for all.
That's a very clear point and very strong point made by Mr. Charlie. Coming to Mr. Dubey, Mr. Dubey, do you see any kind of similarities between what kind of situation India faced maybe 25, 30 years back, and the similar situation or opportunity is there in Africa today of investment? Do you think Indian companies, because there are several big telecom companies who are already operating in Africa, Indian companies, do you think they have a big scope of investment there?
Yeah, I'll come to that. So coming to Mr. Charlie's point, where he said that they have to develop basically a sustainable model. I mean, you can get the money from World Bank and African Development Bank and make an investment. What are you going to do that after you have put your internet lines all over the continent? What happens? Who pays for that? That's the big question. So you need to develop basically a model where, in India we did something. You had the BPOs which came in, and then you had the BPOs which were there in the cities, and then the BPOs got very, very competitive. And the BPOs then moved to the B cities. From the A cities, initially the BPOs came in places like Delhi, then Gurgaon, then Noida, then you had in Hyderabad and Bangalore, in Chennai, and all these places. Gradually, these places became very expensive, labor became expensive, And then, what happened was these metropolitan cities, because there were so many companies, there used to be a lot of attrition. So to address that, some of the companies actually started setting up shops or their workforce centers in these cities, like say for instance, like Trichy or Kerala. These are smaller cities which have the cost of living is very less, and you have good education system there. So something like that has to be done here. And having said that, my company, for instance, DDD, where I work, we have actually started working on this project. So we have something called we initially thought of setting up cyber cafes all over Kenya. So that started off, but again, we faced the same problem. We said that cyber cafes will not be effective because after some time nobody is going to come because everyone has got smartphones these days and they would be doing everything there. So now the objective has been changed slightly. So we go to all these smaller places, but we make that a sustainable model. I mean, people can come in and use it for maybe filling an online application or something from in the remotest of the villages. So we are taking internet to the remotest of the villages. At the same time, where we find a pool of resources who can actually, take away part of the work which is being done in Nairobi. Nairobi is an expensive place. So something that can be done there, we are offloading that something which is repetitive, doesn't require too much of thinking, doesn't require too much of training. That kind of work was there, and it gets done there. So we are working on a model which is similar to this, and that is how things happened in India also. If you see, like I already said. So initially, you had just the software companies. Then after the software companies, you got the IT-enabled ITES, which is the BPUs and the KPUs. These things came into place. And after that, you have these going to the B cities and then to the C cities. So something called a rural BPU was happening in India, and it's still happening in India. So you have these small hubs in different small cities, which basically, and the best thing is the attrition levels are very low. There is no competition, and people who get in once, they tend to stay around, they get trained, and they want to move up the value chain basically. So something like that has to be replicated in Africa.
Great. Iziogo, do you think, as Mr. Dubey was mentioning about how in India, how it initially started in the form of BPOs, starting in, urban parts of India, and then KPOs came, and how the demand generated and the business improved. Do you think the same kind of development happening in some African countries where the youth or the startup industry can provide the push now of more digitalization of their country for better economic prospects?
Yeah, so basically that is why, from each time we discuss, I tell you I'm a Pan-African because I always see the development of Africa, the digital empowerment of Africa to be something that needs to go throughout the 55 countries of Africa. It cannot happen in just South Africa. If it happens in only South Africa, then we don't see it as a complete digitalization of the African continent. And what we have been trying to do from our end is connecting African businesses with Asian businesses. I mean, what I mean is that we're trying to get people who are solely interested in investing, not investing on government project, because when you have this analog system, as I repeatedly mentioned, you see that you give money to individuals who are supposed to run projects for the public, and they end up keeping this money in their pocket, or they end up selling public assets to gain personal gains. So it doesn't work that way. And what we're trying so hard to do is see how we can connect African startups, those who are even in digital, like we've got a lot of students here in India who are doing tremendously very well and developing things that we think the African continent needs for a more renewable and sustainable functional system. So we're connecting these students with to be investors, angel investors, and those who actually are doing it for the sake of their own profit. so that we can be able to, if taking these technologies back to Africa, it would not only serve as a game changer, but actually disrupt the analog system that is that's playing a stronghold in the continent. So I think what we just need now is the right set of mind, people who are in the political top that has the will and understands the vision and the drive, so that we don't, at the end of the day, kill this passion that the young ones have. Because when it dies, then it means the resurrection is going to happen in the next generation. And we think our generation has a lot to contribute to the advancement of Africa. And if we are not given a sound opportunity to contribute our own quota right now while we're youthful, then we think we are being robbed. So a lot of people are trying their best. We just need the political will. We need people from
so political will is the need of the hour. That's what you're saying. Exactly. So that brings me to the last point of the discussion. Very briefly, I need your inputs on that, and then we'll complete our today's episode. Since digitalization is going to be the next big wave in Africa, what do you think the data privacy and cybersecurity issues that Africa needs to take care of, and what policy level changes are required at this moment? Very briefly, if you can share about that, Mr. Charlie.
Yes, I would say that for now in Africa, we don't see this kind of continental will to go for, for a kind of legislation for data protection and data privacy. For now, the Malabo African Union Convention on Data Protection and Cybersecurity has just been ratified by 14 countries over 55, and that's just not normal if we think of this. And you will see clearly that Africa is heading to kind of colonization, even here, kind of digital colonization that has turned to be now a kind of data colonization, because actually multinationals are working in Africa and are just exploiting and raping everything over our data, and nobody is caring about that. And this is because most of those technology and platforms and that use data are multinationals, and they are not even based in Africa. When even though they have some affiliates or maybe representative in Africa, they are not based here. And the fact is that even our servers, those data, big data servers, they are not in Africa. So most of our data has been just harvested, and located elsewhere out of Africa. And so the best thing to do for our countries, for our government, and I will say for African Union, is to enforce this and strategize around data protection and cybersecurity regulations and make it work. Because if we don't make it work, we see clearly that it will be difficult.
Great. Mr. Dubey.
I concur. I can concur. And this is not just Africa. Every country should have their data protection in place. You cannot be, leaking away all your personal information and all your official information, also for that matter. Because I understand the concern that you have everything in the cloud, and it can be things can go wrong. But again, you only depend on those companies which basically say or they basically vet it that okay, your data is secure, and you don't indulge with those players who can have these issues of data security. That is of prime importance. And if the policies need to be strengthened, many countries have done that. They just need to borrow it from there and implement it here, and just tweak it a little bit here and there. Otherwise, I know the concern that Mr. Charlie has mentioned. It's a very, very serious threat for the people of Africa.
Great. Mr. Iziugo, your concluding remarks.
Well, I said, despite disruptions in global order, this is not the time to retreat into isolationism and populism, but to focus on a clear path that will lead us entirely as a globe, you know, to a more transparent, a more progressive future, you know. So I think when we're talking about digitalization and all empowering Africa, we still always need to look at the role that the world has to play also. It's not just on the analog leadership, because when they go to take loans, there are governments who give them loans, knowing clearly that these people are not going to effectively, or the systems are not systems that are effective enough to handle this project. And there is no level of accountability in what ways. At the end of the day, the people's assets are confiscated. So I think a lot has to be done for the people, just as I've told you earlier also on acceptance. The government, we lack leadership, we have rulerships, you know, so it's until we get leadership corrected, I don't think even the policies and the privacies are going to work. Because at the end of the day, even from the extraction of people's data, the government, few individuals in the analog sector still benefit. So I think in a nutshell, Africa needs to fix its leadership, Mr. Charlie. And once we get that right, I think a lot of things will fall in place.
Great. So thank you so much, Mr. Charlie, Mr. Dube, and Mr. Eziogo for joining in today's discussion. I think COVID, in a way, has provided a wonderful opportunity for Africa. Exactly. If we have the right kind of political commitment and strategic decision making, I think lives of millions and millions of Africans can change in a very positive way, and they'll be more with accessible and inclusive, you know, digitalization of their lives. So once again, thank you for joining us today. And this was the second episode of Africa Talks. We'll be back again next week with another issue and with 3 more panelists from Africa. So good night and goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.